20 Days with Julian and Little Bunny by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Read by Frank Blissett. August 5th, Tuesday. I slept pretty well, and so did the old gentleman, although he woke me once with his tumblings and tossings. We got up, as usual, at 6:30, my cold being apparently on the mending hand. The weather, as we found on going for the milk, was rather less chill than yesterday, but there were clouds over the whole sky, here and there resting on the ridges of the hills. No wind at all, the lake perfectly smooth. Coming home from Luther's, the little man lingered behind to gather some flowers, and then setting out to run, he came down with a terrible tumble. It now lacks 11:15. The only remarkable event, thus far, has been a visit. I was sitting in the boudoir when a knock came to the front door, and Mrs. Peters said that a lady wished to see me, so I went upstairs on tiptoe and made myself as presentable as I could at short notice, and came down to the dining room. The visitor was a lady, rather young and quite comely, with pleasant and intelligent eyes, in a pretty Quaker dress. She offered me her hand, and spoke with much simplicity, but yet in a ladylike way, of her interest in my works, and her not being able to resist a desire to see me on finding herself in my vicinity. I asked her into the sitting-room to enjoy our back view, and we talked of the scenery and of various persons and matters. Lowell, Whittier, Mr. James, and Herman Melville were more or less discussed. She seemed to be a particular friend of Whittier, and had heard of his calling on me 2 or 3 years ago. Her manners were very agreeable indeed. The Quaker simplicity and the little touch of Quaker phraseology gave piquancy to her refinement and air of society. She had a pleasant smile and eyes that readily responded to one's thought, so that it was not difficult to talk with her. A singular, but yet a gentle freedom in expressing her own opinions. An entire absence of affectation. These were the traits that impressed me, and on the whole, it was the only pleasant visit I ever experienced in my capacity as author. She did not bore me with laudations of my own writings, but merely said that there are some authors with whom we felt ourselves privileged to be acquainted by the nature of our sympathy with their writings, or something to that effect, etc., etc., etc. All this time Julian was climbing into my lap. He had on a knit jacket, which I had thought it prudent to endure him with in the morning on account of the east wind. This, however, I took off in the lady's presence. I had brushed and frizzled his hair after breakfast, but it only looked the worse for my pains. She smiled on him and praised his healthy aspect, and inquired whether he looked like his mother, observing that he had no resemblance to myself. Finally she rose to depart, and I ushered her to the gate, where, as she took leave, she told me her name, Elizabeth Lloyd, and bidding me farewell, she went on her way, and I saw her no more. She had not ridden hither, but was on a walk. She resides in Philadelphia. Julian allowed her to kiss him. I have read Fourier today, when I have read anything. After dinner we set out on a walk down to the lake. The weather is still uncertain, threatening rain all the time, and never fulfilling its threat. It might more properly be called a promise now than a threat, for it is an exceedingly dry time indeed. There are 5 or 6 feet more of margin to the lake than I ever saw before, and the brook is quite dry along a great part of its channels. The effect of the drought is visible in the foliage of the woods. It has shrunken within a few days, so that the shade which it casts is not so dense as before. This lack of moisture may be one reason that withered and yellow leaves, and even branches, begin to be seen. But many autumnal characteristics may now be detected. The yellow flowers, the yellow hue of grain fields, the no longer juicy but crispy herbage. Everything tells a story of a past climax. And when did it pass? I am sure I don't know. On our way home, Julian was stung on the leg by a wasp and squealed outrageously. This was getting over the fence by Mr. Tappan's oat field. He seemed quite in an agony at first, but was so far recovered before we reached the house that he asked for a piece of bread and some water more earnestly than a cure for the bite. I first bathed his leg in arnica and then fed him. All this has brought us up to 5:15. He continues to pester me with his inquisitions. For instance, just now, while he is whittling with my jackknife, "Father, if you had bought all the jackknives at the shop, what would you do for another when you broke them all?" "I would go somewhere else," say I. But there is no suppressing him. "If you had bought all the jackknives in the world, what would you do?" And here my patience gives way, and I entreat him not to trouble me with any more foolish questions. I really think it would do him good to spank him, apropos of this habit. I put him to bed between 6 and 7, and my cold being not quite well, went to bed myself at 9. That was 20 Days with Julian and Little Bunny, August 5th, 1851, by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Read by Frank Blissett.